Blade wasn't just a superhero movie. It was a violent revolution that changed action cinema in 1998. But years later, the darkest story wasn't on screen. Behind the leather and blood, the cast faced losses, disappearances, and lives far more tragic than their roles ever hinted. Stay with us as we uncover who they became and what time took from them. Wesley Snipes as Blade. Wesley Snipes was born on July 31st, 1962, in Orlando, Florida. At 36 years old, he played Blade, the half-human, half-vampire daywalker in Blade, 1998. The performance didn't just define the movie. It proved that a dark, violent Marvel film led by a black action hero could succeed worldwide, reshaping the future of superhero cinema. That ferocious presence on screen grew out of a childhood shaped by fear and pressure. Snipes is the son of Wesley Rudolph Snipes, an aircraft engineer, and Marion Long, a teacher's assistant. But his life was never stable. He was surrounded by gangs, street violence, and constant threats, while his small frame made him a target for bullying. At just 7 years old, he turned to martial arts not for trophies, but for survival, slowly replacing fear with discipline. When his family relocated to Florida, the move cut short his studies at New York's High School of Performing Arts, shattering his early dream of a classical acting career and forcing him to rebuild from scratch. Fame brought opportunity, but it also fractured his private world. Snipes married April Dubois in 1985, and their son Jelani Asar Snipes was born in 1988, just as his career surged with New Jack City and White Men Can't Jump. The marriage collapsed under the strain of success and separation, ending in divorce in 1990. Years later, he found calmer ground with painter Nak-Young Nikki Park, whom he married in 2003, building a quieter family life with 4 children far from Hollywood's glare. However, the deepest wound came through a grinding crisis in the 2000s. Snipes' legal battle over unpaid taxes culminated in a prison sentence beginning in 2010, a period that stripped him of momentum, reputation, and financial security. Confinement weighed heavily on his mental health, forcing him to confront isolation and regret. He survived that period through strict physical routines, a vegan diet, and the same martial discipline that once kept him safe as a child. Now, Wesley Snipes is 64 years old. He remains active in film, television, and writing, choosing projects with care while producing independently and expanding his creative work beyond acting. His estimated net worth stands at around $10 million, a figure reshaped by legal losses but stabilized through resilience. Stephen Dorff as Deacon Frost. Stephen Dorff was born on July 29, 1973, in Atlanta, Georgia. At 25 years old, he played Deacon Frost, the radical, power-hungry vampire antagonist in Blade, 1998. His icy charisma and unpredictability gave the film its dangerous edge, turning Frost into a villain audiences couldn't ignore. That intensity did not appear by accident. Dorff is the son of Steve Dorff, a successful composer and music producer, so he grew up in Los Angeles surrounded by studios, agents, and expectations. Acting began early through commercials for major brands, but the pressure to perform, combined with constant relocation between schools, pushed him away from formal education altogether. Romantic stability never followed. Dorff never married and has no children, though his relationships with high-profile figures such as Pamela Anderson often unfolded under public scrutiny. Emotional distance became a pattern, mirrored in the solitary characters he gravitated toward in films like Cecil B. Demented and Somewhere, where loneliness was no longer hidden but explored on screen. Loss marked him more deeply than illness. The death of his younger brother, songwriter Andrew Dorff, in 2016, cut through him with lasting force, reshaping how he viewed fame and ambition. From that point on, Dorff openly rejected blockbuster formulas. choosing roles that reflected grief, disillusionment, and quiet introspection, including his acclaimed turn in True Detective. Today, Stephen Dorff is 53 years old and continues to work steadily in independent cinema and television, favoring depth over visibility. With an estimated net worth of about $12 million, his career stands as a deliberate retreat from spectacle. Kris Kristofferson as Whistler. Kris Kristofferson was born on June 22, 1936, in Brownsville, Texas. At 62 years old, he played Abraham Whistler, the grizzled vampire hunter and Blade's emotional backbone in Blade, 1998. His performance anchored the film with gravity and regret, giving the action a soul and making Whistler the human heart of the story. That quiet weight came from a childhood defined by pressure and displacement. Kristofferson grew up in a strict military household, constantly moving as his father rose through the ranks of the U.S. Air Force, eventually becoming a general. The rigid discipline, forced conformity, and expectation that he follow a military path left him feeling trapped, thin-skinned, and isolated. Writing and music became his escape, later shaping the introspective voice behind songs like Sunday Mornin' Comin' Down and films such as Cisco Pike. Adulthood amplified both talent and turmoil. His first marriage to Fran Beer collapsed under the weight of ambition and heavy drinking. His second marriage to singer Rita Coolidge burned intensely, but ended painfully, marked by alcohol abuse and emotional volatility during the height of his fame after A Star Is Born. Only with his third wife, Lisa Myers, whom he married in 1983, did Kristofferson find long-term stability, raising 5 children and gradually stepping away from chaos. Health struggles arrived silently and were misunderstood for years. Beginning around 2013, Kristofferson showed signs of memory loss and confusion, initially diagnosed as Alzheimer's disease. The true cause was later identified as Lyme disease, and treatment brought improvement, though the ordeal forced him to confront decline and mortality. By 2021, he officially retired from music and acting, choosing rest after decades of relentless creation. Kris Kristofferson passed away on September 28, 2024, at the age of 88. With an estimated net worth of $50 million, earned through music, film, and property, he left behind a legacy defined not by perfection, but by honesty, and by turning personal pain into enduring art. N. Bush Wright, as Karen N. Bush Wright, was born on September 7, 1969, in Brooklyn, New York. At 29 years old, she played Dr. Karen Jensen, the compassionate hematologist drawn into Blade's violent underworld in Blade, 1998. Her role grounded the film in empathy and reason, offering a calm counterbalance to its darkness and brutality. That quiet strength was forged in a harsh environment. Wright grew up in working-class Brooklyn, surrounded by poverty, street pressure, and instability. Dance became her refuge, a structured escape that led her to train at the Alvin Ailey Dance Center and the Martha Graham School. The emotional depth she later brought to films like Fresh and Zebrahead echoed the resilience she learned early. Professional success did not translate into a conventional personal life. Wright never married and has no children, choosing privacy in an industry that rewards exposure. As her career progressed, she gravitated toward intense, socially grounded roles, then gradually stepped back, resisting Hollywood's demand for constant reinvention and visibility. Loss reshaped her life more deeply than illness ever did. Wright's mother passed away in 2009 after decades of service in public education, and in 2011, her father was murdered. These devastating events pushed Wright further away from public life. Now, N. Bush Wright is 57 years old. She lives largely outside the spotlight, occasionally working in acting, dance, and creative projects on her own terms. With an estimated net worth of around $1 million, her legacy rests not on fame, but on restraint. Donal Logue. As Quinn. Donal Logue was born on February 27, 1966, in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. At 32 years old, he played Quinn, the reckless, wisecracking vampire henchman in Blade, 1998. Though a supporting role, Quinn injected chaos and dark humor into the film, sharpening its violent tone and making the vampire underworld feel unpredictable and dangerous. That raw edge reflected a childhood marked by instability and exposure to hardship. Logue grew up in a constantly moving Irish immigrant family, spending formative years near the U.S.-Mexico border, where poverty and social contrast were impossible to ignore. Frequent relocations denied him roots, while witnessing hardship at close range hardened his worldview. Theater became a lifeline during adolescence, later echoing in the emotional grit he brought to films like Gettysburg and The Patriot. His adult relationships followed a non-traditional path. Logue never married, but shared a long-term partnership with Casey Walker, with whom he has 2 children, Finn and Jade, now known as Arlo. Family life brought both devotion and fear, most publicly in 2017 when Arlo went missing briefly, a moment that exposed Logue's vulnerability and fierce protectiveness as a parent. Health nearly ended everything. In 2025, Logue suffered acute organ failure, collapsing suddenly and coming close to death. The recovery was slow and sobering, forcing him to step back from work and reassess his physical limits. However, the resilience carried him through uncertain childhood years and unstable early adulthood. Now, Donal Logue is 60 years old. He continues to act selectively while also running his hardwood and trucking businesses in Oregon, choosing balance over excess. With an estimated net worth of around $3 million, drawn from acting and entrepreneurship, Logue's life stands as proof that endurance, not fame, became his defining trait. Arly Jover, as Mercury. Arly Jover was born on February 2, 1971, in Melilla, Spain. At 27 years old, she played Mercury, the lethal, sensual vampire enforcer in Blade, 1998. Her performance gave the film a physical elegance and menace, turning movement and silence into weapons that sharpened its visual identity. That precision was born from an unforgiving childhood choice. Jover left school at 14, cutting short a normal adolescence to pursue classical dance. Moving alone to New York to train at the School of American Ballet, she faced isolation, financial pressure, and relentless discipline. Dance became survival, shaping the control and intensity later carried into roles like Vampires, Los Muertos, and her art house work in Axolotl Overkill. As ballet gave way to acting, the challenge shifted to visibility and momentum. Breaking into film required starting again from the margins, auditions, small parts, and genre work, until Blade opened doors. She followed with international projects and European cinema, steadily building credibility rather than chasing stardom, and earning festival recognition that validated her transition. By 2026, Arly Jover is 55 years old. She lives in Paris with her daughter, working selectively across film, performance, and artistic projects in Europe. With an estimated net worth of about $1 million earned through acting and dance, Jover's story is one of quiet endurance, discipline transformed into craft, and craft sustained without spectacle. Udo Kier as Dragonetti. Udo Kier was born on October 14, 1944, in Cologne, Germany. At 54 years old, he played Dragonetti, the ancient aristocratic vampire power broker in Blade, 1998. The role added gravitas and old-world menace, giving the film a sense of lineage and history that elevated its vampire mythology beyond pure action. That eerie authority came from a childhood forged in catastrophe. Kier was born in a hospital that was bombed during World War II, and his mother pulled him alive from the rubble. He grew up without a father amid the ruins of post-war Germany. Poverty, hunger, and constant instability shaped his earliest years, teaching him survival through adaptability. That intensity later resurfaced in cult classics like Flesh for Frankenstein and Blood for Dracula, where personal history quietly informed his unsettling screen presence. As his career expanded, Kier embraced roles others avoided, turning marginality into strength. Working across European art, cinema, and Hollywood, he became a trusted collaborator for directors like Gus Van Sant in My Own Private Idaho, and later auteurs who valued his willingness to inhabit discomfort. His career thrived not through convention, but through consistency and fearless choice. Even into his late 70s, Kier continued working at full force, earning an Independent Spirit Award nomination for Swan Song. Sadly, he passed away on November 23, 2025, at the age of 81 in Rancho Mirage, California. With an estimated net worth of $10 million earned across more than 6 decades and over 220 films, he left behind a singular legacy. A survivor of war who transformed trauma into art, eccentricity into endurance, and presence into immortality. Sanaa Lathan, as Vanessa Sanaa Lathan, was born on September 19, 1971, in New York City. At 27 years old, she played Vanessa Brooks, the vulnerable woman whose fate personalizes Blade's curse in Blade, 1998. The role humanized the story, anchoring the action with emotional stakes that lingered beyond the fight scenes. That emotional clarity grew out of a pressured upbringing. Raised as a latchkey child in an entertainment household where work came first, Lathan often returned to empty rooms and borrowed supervision, witnessing addiction and instability around her. Acting became structure and escape, later refined through rigorous training and roles that explored intimacy and ambition, such as The Best Man and Love and Basketball. Romantic life never followed a traditional script. Lathan never married and has no children, though she dated publicly at times, including a relationship with Omar Epps. Choosing independence over expectation, she focused on craft, moving fluidly between film, television, and theater while guarding her private life. The demand to prove depth beyond early casting pushed her toward the stage, earning a Tony Award nomination for A Raisin in the Sun, and later toward voice work and directing, expanding her range and authority. Now, Sanaa Lathan is 55 years old. She remains active as an actor, producer, and director, continuing to balance prestige projects with mainstream work. With an estimated net worth of $5 million, her career reflects longevity built on restraint, craft, and the refusal to let early roles define the woman she became. Eric Edwards as Pearl. Eric Edwards was born on August 24, 1966, in Topeka, Kansas. At 32 years old, he played Pearl, the grotesque, tragic vampire information broker in Blade, 1998. Though brief, the role became unforgettable, giving the film one of its most disturbing and human moments by showing the physical cost of monstrosity. That performance grew out of a childhood shaped by scarcity and pressure. Edwards grew up in a poor Midwestern environment where money was tight and expectations were low. Acting became a way out early on, not as a dream, but as a necessity, offering structure and self-worth. Years later, the vulnerability he brought to Pearl echoed the same emotional exposure seen in projects like Problem Child 2 and Sergeant Bilko. Momentum in his career came from persistence rather than visibility. Edwards worked steadily across theater, stand-up comedy, and independent film, often juggling multiple roles behind the scenes. His dedication paid off with recognition at festivals, including acclaim for Tennis, Anyone, which earned a grand jury prize and validated years of work outside the mainstream spotlight. A major turning point arrived through personal discipline and reinvention. In the late 1990s, Edwards committed to a dramatic health transformation, losing more than 210 pounds, an achievement that reshaped both his stamina and his creative output. The experience fueled deeply personal stage projects and one-man shows, where resilience and survival became central themes rather than side notes. Now, Eric Edwards is 60 years old. He continues working selectively in acting, theater, and teaching, grounded far from Hollywood excess. With an estimated net worth of around $1 million, his legacy rests not on stardom, but on endurance, turning limitation into craft and refusing to fade away. Traci Lords as Raquel. Traci Lords was born on May 7, 1968, in Steubenville, Ohio. At 30 years old, she played Raquel, the calculating vampire seductress in Blade, 1998. The role marked her decisive entry into genre cinema, showing she could command the screen with restraint, menace, and control rather than shock value. That transformation was shaped by a childhood defined by abandonment and trauma. Raised in poverty after her father left and her mother struggled emotionally, Lords grew up without stability or protection. Sexual abuse at a young age fractured any sense of safety, and by her mid-teens she had dropped out of school and drifted into the adult film industry while still a minor. The emotional damage of those years later surfaced in her acting, from the defiant edge of crybaby to the colder intensity of virtuosity. Adulthood brought repeated attempts to anchor her life. Her first marriage to Brooke Yaton ended in divorce, followed by a brief second marriage to Ryan Granger. Only with Jeff Grunewald, whom she married in 2002, did she find lasting stability, eventually becoming a mother and rebuilding her life away from constant public scrutiny. Psychological scars remained central to every reinvention. Formal training at the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute, long-term sobriety, and reclaiming creative agency became tools for survival. Later horror work such as Excision allowed her to convert lived trauma into performance, earning critical recognition instead of exploitation. By 2026, Traci Lords is 58 years old. She continues working as an actress, musician, and occasional director, balancing creative projects with family life. With an estimated net worth of around $1 million, her journey stands as one of Hollywood's starkest reversals, escaping exploitation, enduring judgment, and redefining herself through resilience rather than erasure. Tim Guinee as Curtis Webb. Tim Guinee was born on November 18, 1962, in Los Angeles, California. At 36 years old, he played Curtis Webb, a minor but sharply drawn human antagonist in Blade, 1998. The role added texture to the film's world, reminding audiences that corruption and moral weakness were not limited to vampires alone. That grounded presence was shaped by an unsettled early life. Guinee grew up across Illinois and Texas, moving frequently with his family and never fully settling in one place. The constant change bred independence, but also instability, pushing him toward the arts as a source of continuity. Acting became a long-term pursuit rather than a quick breakthrough, later reflected in his steady, character-driven work in projects like Stargate SG-1 and Revolution. Career momentum came through persistence in supporting roles that gradually built credibility. Guinee found wider recognition portraying railroad tycoon Collis Huntington in Hell on Wheels, a performance that required restraint and authority over several seasons. Around the same period, he appeared in Iron Man and Iron Man 2, quietly entering the Marvel Universe years after Blade, this time as a military officer rather than a villain. Stability arrived off-screen through partnership rather than upheaval. Guinee married Daisy Foote in 1997, grounding his life outside the industry. While not marked by public health crises, his life was shaped by service and responsibility. After witnessing tragedy firsthand, he became a volunteer firefighter, a commitment that mirrored the quiet seriousness often present in his roles. Now, Tim Guinee is 64 years old. He continues working steadily in film, television, and theater, favoring substance over visibility. With an estimated net worth of around $3 million, earned through decades of consistent work, his career stands as an example of longevity built not on stardom, but on reliability, craft, and resolve. Kenny Johnson as Heat-Seeking. Dennis. Kenny Johnson was born on July 13, 1963, in New Haven, Connecticut. At 35 years old, he played heat-seeking Dennis, the unlucky civilian caught in a vampire ambush in Blade, 1998. Though the role was brief, it became the film's shock-opening moment, grounding the supernatural world in sudden, brutal realism and setting the tone for everything that followed. That raw vulnerability traced back to a demanding childhood far from Hollywood. Johnson grew up on a 30-acre farm in rural Vermont, where isolation and hard physical labor were daily realities. Struggling with dyslexia, he turned to sports, football and basketball, as both refuge and discipline, learning resilience through repetition and failure. Those early years forged the physical confidence and toughness that later surfaced in roles like Pensacola, Wings of Gold, and his early television work. Breaking into acting was not immediate success, but steady accumulation. Johnson moved through modeling, commercials, and small television parts before landing a career-defining turn as Detective Curtis Lemansky in The Shield. The role transformed him into a respected character actor, known for emotional volatility and loyalty under pressure. That reputation carried forward into long-running series such as Saving Grace and Bates Motel, where intensity mattered more than leading man polish. His career reached lasting stability with ensemble television rather than awards. From Sons of Anarchy to SWAT, Johnson built a reputation for reliability, physical commitment, and emotional credibility. On SWAT, his portrayal of Dominique Luca extended across multiple seasons, proving endurance mattered as much as breakout moments. Today, Kenny Johnson is 63 years old. He remains active in television, balancing work with family life alongside his wife Kathleen Ovison and their daughter Angelica. With an estimated net worth of around $2 million, earned through decades of steady acting, Johnson's career reflects perseverance, turning early struggle into longevity and small roles into a lasting presence. More than 2 decades after Blade redefined the vampire genre, its cast has lived lives far darker, quieter, and more complex than anything the screen could show. Fame faded, battles changed, and time left its mark in ways no script could predict. So looking back now, which cast member's journey surprised you the most? And who do you think changed the most since 1998? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Blade cast then and now, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story hidden behind the spotlight. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Goodbye.